Who's excited for this? All right.
The answer to that was no one.
Apparently you've never seen Mark Montgomery before. Okay. You picked the right room. Okay. You second for the doors to be shut. So I'm double dutying right now. I'm switching from room MC to panel moderator, and I'm really excited for this panel. You don't see the name of it at the moment because we're about to do a demo. Dean, are you ready to transmit? While Dean's pulling this up, I'm Josh Corman. I'm one of your hosts for this. I run the Undisruptible project at IamTheCavalry.org, work for IST. The further we get into a Volt Typhoon type concurrent disruption of US infrastructure or attacks from Iran or someone else, what very quickly becomes clear is that we don't have a consensus on what do you do when demand exceeds capacity. And this panel is meant to provoke you, upset you, not egregiously, but just with some cold, hard candor. And I can't think of better people than the ones on stage to bring that cold, hard candor. We initially were going to call this a tale of two cities because we were trying to decide what's more important, continuity of operations, which we will define, or public safety, human life. And then other people said, well, what about continuity of the economy? What about, is the economy stupid? So do you basically protect the data center if it loses water, or the trauma center? Do you protect the trauma center or the dialysis center? Do you protect the trauma center in a town that has nobody else for 200 miles, or the one that has 3 trauma centers? And these types of very high stakes decisions and ruthless prioritization should happen left of boom in a rational, ethical, first principled way, not amidst chaos. So we want to surface and shatter some assumptions. I think the actual title is A Tale of Three Cities: COOP, Continuity of the Economy, and versus public safety. Real quick, they can probably introduce themselves a little bit when I call on them, but I have with me retired Rear Admiral Mark Montgomery, of many different things, including one of his hats was Pacific Command, kind of the theater we may see a conflict with Taiwan or over Taiwan. Dr. Natalie Sullivan of GW, an ER doc and disaster medicine fellowship lead. Chuck, an OTICS IR expert who's going to probably make you cry. And the colorful Old Bay seasoning shirt is one of my favorite water professional engineers in the water sector and other utilities, Dean Ford. So we're going to start not with a title slide, but with hopefully a 8-minute or so demo that you can play with a lot more in the hallway. But Dean, please activate your microphone. And
that's right, to record. I'm gonna have to hold this.
Yes, the recording will not know.
Okay, so let's start with some chaos then.
All right, engineers bringing the chaos.
That's right. All right, so we've had this conversation about water hammers and such, and I thought, does anybody really understand what it is that we're talking about? So quick show of hands. Do we actually understand what a water hammer is?
No.
Have you seen one? Have you seen the damage that it can do? Okay, well, let's get started with a few things. So in my hand, Home Depot, piece of copper pipe. Can I break this?
Can you break the copper pipe?
Can I break the copper pipe? Not easily? Was that the?
Show me wrong. That was your scraping.
All right. So the point of that is that copper is one of the common materials, not necessarily for major pipelines, but it's just a material. So this thing that called material fatigue, it can do that the same on a PVC pipe, which a lot of our water mains are made out of. I can do it to a concrete pipe. I can do it to steel rod. We can do anything with a little bit of fatigue. So one of the ways to cause that is through pressure, right? So as we're out in the water system, and I wanted this to work a lot better, but frankly, Murphy took over In fairness, we only came up with this like Thursday.
yeah,
so. All right, so here's a typical water system. What you see on the screen is the pressure. So what I have here is I got a pump in here for a pond. It's going through our water main throughout the city. Way out on the edge is a pressure sensor, a valve, an automatic valve, and a manual valve. And then it's just feeding back in so I don't create a giant mess. So that's sitting right now at about 2.8 pounds per square inch, right? So not a tremendous pressure. And as things go on and things happen, I can close valves, I can open valves, I can make things happen. And if I do that slowly, I'll be set up outside too. So if anybody wants to take another picture. But if I do that slowly, I can deadhead that pump. And not a whole lot happens to the pressure in the line, right? There's not a lot of bad things going on there. However, what happens if I do that quickly? Who knows their physics? What happens when you get mass moving at a high rate of speed and you stop it instantly? Let's see. So that almost went up to, probably did go over 15 pounds, but my resolution's not there. So now this is just a 1/2 inch line, so my mass isn't that great. But when you're talking about a water main like that feeds the city of New York, raw water that you can walk through or drive a semi truck through, these things start to become a real problem. And what we can do because of these, there's a new report that just came out. 2012, the American Water Works Association had a report called Buried No Longer. It called out a 1-point-something trillion deficit in the water infrastructure, mainly the pipes in the ground that nobody sees but magically work every time you turn on your faucet. Those materials are really only designed to be in a service 20, 30, 40, 50 years max. We have far exceeded that and approaching 80, 90, 100 years on a lot of those. There's still wooden pipes in some cities that exist. The big thing is,
I have some.
You have some? Yeah. The big problem with that is that as we do things with water pressures, right, I can make things happen. And what is that pressure doing as I increase and decrease that pressure? It's doing the same thing, only it's an external, or I'm sure there's a physics name for that. Anyway, it's a lateral, not what I just did here, but it's still the same concept, and that material is fatiguing. So most of these systems succeed because their pressure doesn't change a lot. But what if I get in here and start screwing with it? And I could probably screw with it a lot without anybody even knowing, because it doesn't throw any alarms, doesn't cause any real problem. I have pressure reducing valves everywhere else that overcompensate for the pressure changes. Not to mention the damage that I can do to the pumps because of these pressure changes and the resulting parts and pieces to that. So anyway, so I think we start off this discussion with the chaos of somebody got in here, caused the water hammer, shattered several mains. I have brought a hammer if anybody would like to partake in that. So anyway, I think we start off with we've taken out the water supply. Okay. Is that where you want to be?
Thank you. I'm sure you've engendered many questions, but we will defer them for now. Thank you. Can we thank Dean for personally purchasing all this demo equipment? Okay. So there will be other talks throughout the next 2 days on water hammers and some of the mitigations. In fact, I'm doing one at 3:30 with Gus, another water engineer, based on some things we did in New Hampshire. Water hammer is one of the hazards, but the truth is, when we ask somebody if you had unfettered access and went evil, if you're a water engineer for a plant, you went evil, what kind of harm could you do? And we started enumerating those because our adversaries do have that level of access, and the supply chain is pretty finite and knowable, so they can affect things like this. The number one concern that comes up instantly from them in their love language is a water hammer. It's not the only one. We're going to go through about 5 of them in our session at 3:30. We just wanted to make this a little more palpable. Obviously, we wanted to blow something up, but we couldn't do that safely on stage with fluid yet. But we have plenty of these.
Version 1.
Yes. As we pivot, one thing I will tantalize you with is it stands to reason and makes sense. But apparently, what I learned is the overwhelming majority of water mains that break, at least in New England for us, are in the winter. So the coldness of the water and it changes the density and therefore the punch of the water hammer. And the pipes are more brittle in the winter. So it's pretty terrible that one of the most likely times of year for a Taiwan incursion might be March when it's still winter in the north. So anyhow, let's have some of that fun. So I have assembled quite an interesting group here. Now that we've kind of framed this up, that water damage can be affected remotely, a number of different ways. That was one. Let's switch to Natalie, whom I very much learned from and enjoyed working with at cybermedsummit.org nonprofit. And let's talk about if you were to lose water pressure, if you were south of a water hammer for one of the hospitals in the country, give us a purview into what might happen and how quickly.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think this is something that happens on different levels, right? And the way I always like to talk about this is we've all been to the ER, or you've brought your loved one to the ER, hopefully not recently. And you go in and you can appreciate almost immediately, the medical internet of things, how interconnected we are with all of our computer connectivity. And that's, one element of patient care delivery. So we obviously depend on the medical record. We need that to gather information about our patients, but there's so much more that goes into medical care that's outside of, data breaches or privacy. And when we talk about water and utilities, sometimes it's underappreciated how dependent your healthcare systems are. And so beyond just, the connectivity of things, we use water for almost every part of your care, right? We're using it to sanitize the equipment that we use. We use it to run the HVAC system. You really can't have a hospital without temperature control. We actually have had local hospitals had to go on diversion and prepare to evacuate because of just HVAC. Anyone who needs dialysis needs very large quantities of water in order to get that dialysis. We use it for the things that you in your everyday use water for, right? To feed and water our patients, to clean our patients, to clean our facilities. So we're incredibly dependent on water to the point where there have been reports that a hospital would be at 67 to 99% loss of function only within 2 hours of loss of water. And you can imagine, depending on what kind of hospital you're at, that's the variability of the 67 to 99%. Do you happen to be near a reservoir? Do you happen to have this supply of backup water? That's going to be the 67%, right? Our facilities that are just not equipped to deal with the loss, those are going to be the immediate 2 hours, 99%. We can't really do what we need to do. And then beyond that individual hospital being affected, you have the region, right? It's easy to understand just thinking about it, but we also have evidence to support that when one hospital goes down, the entire region is affected. Mortality rates and cardiac arrest go up, stroke times go up. And so just one hospital alone being affected by this loss of water, loss of power, whatever the utility is going to dramatically affect survival rate across the entire region. And when we talk about, the delivery of care and what matters, time is enormous, right? We need 4 hours to get you to clot busting medication before you have permanent deficit from a stroke, right? You have 90 minutes from the identification of a heart attack to get to the cath lab and have your catheterization before you have permanent heart damage or death. We have the 1 hour trauma. We have 3 hours to get antibiotics for sepsis. So these delays in care, and on top of, your whole infrastructure really collapsing, is an enormous problem for human life. And then the only other thing I always want to point out more from a disaster systems perspective is that, we always think of hospitals as part of critical infrastructure, right? We're ESF8. When things go wrong, people come to hospitals. All those patients who are getting care at home, who are getting care in nursing homes, they're not going to be able to, get that care, and they're going to want to come to a hospital that's unable to continue that. You have, when there's loss of water, communities who have dehydration get bacterial illness from drinking water that they shouldn't. Those are coming into the hospital. And then from a response perspective, if your responders aren't able to get the care that they need for their loved ones, they're not coming to work. They're not going to come do the functions that they need to do for continuity of operations across the board. They're worried about their loved ones. They're worried about their own physical health. So just a, brief summary, it's pretty devastating. And we can't really have healthcare without water.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. One follow-up question before you shut it off.
Yes.
Maybe 1.5. I'll hold it for I'm 50-50 on this.
I'll still be here.
Do it.
Do it.
So every hospital by law has to have a diesel generator. When you're in a room, the plugs that are red are connected to the generator.
Correct.
Is there any such alternative standby for hospitals for water?
No. There are great resources online from federal organizations that tell you how to best prepare your hospital for water, but there's no you need 30 gallons per person.
Right. And the second one is we say 2 to 4 hours, but at the very first CyberMed summit we ever did in 2017 in Phoenix, Arizona, in 117-degree heat in an all-glass hospital, we ransomed the building HVAC system and didn't realize that they had to evacuate every human within 45 minutes because of the extreme heat. So 2 hours might be your best case scenario.
Totally. And actually, people have a misconception about hospital evacuation. It's incredibly rare because it is so difficult and so fraught. And if it's a regional outage, where are you taking these people? Where are you evacuating them to? And it's very dangerous for patients to be moved.
Yeah, excellent point. Since much of the purpose of Volt Typhoon is for concurrent disruption, if you're diverting someone to a town that's also had a loss of water event, now what? Okay. Thank you for that round of contributions.
My pleasure.
I'm going to next switch to Mark. The purpose of this, can we advance one slide, please? Or whoever's doing the AV, can we, go back, please. All right, you don't know our title, but this is our title. So the original purpose of this was to say we may have competing equities where we can't, it's not up. Yeah, I know. I don't think it's in our control. Okay, maybe that's JT. JT, if you have the sound of my voice, please put the panel discussion slide up. Okay. The purpose of this was, under a crisis, we have a couple terms of art that people have maybe heard but don't know what they mean, called COOP. And there's like a formal definition of COOP, and there's a private sector definition of COOP. There's one called COAT or COATS that Tom Fanning and the Tri-Sector have tried to float. And there's public safety, human life, which is what the cavalry's been about and how I met Natalie and others. And we may not be able to satisfy all of them. Mark, can you give us your best attempt at defining these 3 competing equities for us?
So I think that there's if there's a concerted, particularly nation-state attack on our critical infrastructures but through cyberspace, the actual word of art is screwed. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm only saying that because at one point there was a child in here. But
My child.
So well, then probably no swear words. All right. So because you have 3 competing things and they do have acronyms, but I'll start by saying the 3 competing things are national security, economic, continuity, prosperity, and public health and safety. Now, normally, if your Mark 1 Mod 0 tornado rolls through town, number 3 is in charge, public health and safety. And in fact, we have built a, at times, highly successful natural disaster humanitarian response system in the United States, built on federal government, state, local governments, and private sector entities that all and public entities that all come together to provide emergent medical care, feeding, water, and eventually temporary housing. And I think we do a pretty good job on that. That will be of almost no value when it's a nation state cyber attack on critical infrastructure, which is to say you'll still do it, but it won't solve the problem. The problem then becomes if it's part, and I guess I'm told that my friends from Texas Cyber Command were here, and they're not rocking on the Taiwan problem.
I think he was being taking a contrarian position, maybe.
Yeah. Well, I'll take a non-contrarian position and say the Chinese have our number in critical infrastructure. Volt Typhoon is not something that happened; it's something that's happening. Volt Typhoon is one of about 150 advanced persistent threat teams that are working different aspects of U.S. cyber and critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. They're not all doing what Volt Typhoon does, but lots of them are. I think we've named 8 or 9 typhoons at this point.
Too many.
I was part of a report at Auburn that I think it named at least 7. I will tell you, not all of those are going after critical infrastructure, but enough are. We don't know all their fingerprints, their cyber fingerprints of malicious activity, but we know some of them, and they are uniquely in U.S. and its important allies. It's allies for the movement of military mobility and national security, and allies who are important to our economic productivity. I think our public health and safety is generally a national problem, or they would be working that over as well. So with that said, what we have is, in my mind, people say, well, isn't Volt Typhoon solved? I said, no, Volt Typhoon is being attacked by apathy, because that's the official federal government response to Volt Typhoon. Apathy. It is not actually working hard to solve the problem. I'm sorry, they're solving the problem inside the .gov, trying. They're not doing a great job, but they're trying. They are not solving the problem in the critical infrastructure. They've never set up a grant program to help remediate the problems. They have notified some of the victims.
So
They have not aggressively put out the fingerprints in an unclassified way, the digital forensics of what you need to do to look for Volt Typhoon. They've done it to select companies only. This isn't what we would do for a cruise missile that was inbound, right? We'd let you know what's coming. But there's a stark level of apathy, I think, on this. Part of the problem is that it crossed over presidential administrations, and people tend to look at somebody else, that was somebody else's problem. The problem, of course, is China is aggressively attacking us. I also think it falls prey to the Trump administration's desire to, quote, not piss China off or not compromise our economic work that we're doing with China. That might also explain why there's I think I just saw a report this morning, 300 Chinese companies that are supposed to be put on lists to not be procured from. And magically, the Department of Commerce has published none of those. They have not promulgated them. So I think it falls into that sense of, if we say that there's Fight Club, then we're breaking the rules of Fight Club. Well, there's Fight Club, and Volt Typhoon is the tool the Chinese are using. So why does that matter? It matters because if this attack is done by a nation state, we have not done what we need to do, which is ruthlessly prioritize. You have to know what's number one. You'll find that the bad news is, in a crisis, you'll find out who's number one in a way that's not constructive for anyone, including number one, right? You need to prioritize and say, look, these are the few, and if there's this kind of attack in this area, this is what we're going to prioritize to bring back first. And it's not going to be the same as a hurricane, or I guess what a hurricane, but a tornado or or an earthquake or something like that. It's going to be driven by national security, economic productivity, and public health and safety, in a mix of them. And I would say possibly with a bias towards national security.
probably.
If this is done by a nation state as part of a larger crisis that's going on, that's going to win. So you first have to ruthlessly prioritize. Then you have to warn the other people, you were not prioritized, so that you can work your alternative. You can determine, does my hospital need a 4,000-gallon tank? You would never make that investment if in a dream world you thought you were going to be prioritized. But if in a real world you were told proactively you are not going to be prioritized, then that suddenly 4,000 gallons, which might be like 4 hours of operations, I'm not 100% sure, but someone would figure that out. The one place I've seen this is nuclear power plants, because most of us, on the shit Americans were allowed to be regulated, there's 3 things. One is our money. We regulate the crap out of money. There's like, if you go to a bank, they'll say, Goldman will say, I'm not regulated by the SEC. I'm regulated by 5 different agencies that regulate the types of transactions I do. And then they'll complain that they don't have the same regulatory status. I don't want to get into that, but I'll just say we highly regulate money. Why? Because we want our money protected. And we've seen it. We've heard about friends having it stolen, or we've had it stolen ourselves. Number 2, we regulate nuclear power because there's a false sense of like some kind of 3 Mile Islands, got China, the meltdown kind of thing, which I'm a nuclear engineer, I would not worry about that, but okay. And number 3 is flight safety. Most of us are like, I do not want to fall out of the sky. We're almost sure we're not going to survive that. So flight safety. After that, the American people they start to hear about, do I want regulation? I have to tell one story only because it's about water. I talked about water for years. And I come home and, I've testified 4 or 5 times, talked to my spouse, who's a fantastic former Navy pilot and good person, smart all around. So we're going to vote in Arlington for like the something. And there's like 5 bonds, and they're like for the schools and the libraries and the parks and for the cybersecurity of our water system. So we come out and I say, hey, what'd you do? She goes, oh, I voted for the schools and the parks and library, but not that stupid water cybersecurity. I'm like, I've been working this thing for 5 years, and you can't come to your senses and vote with me on this.
But water's supposed to be free, right?
It lost. Well, her fear was, well, that's money for water. Somebody else should pay that. Of course, these are all public utilities, so they don't have 2 wood nickels strapped together. So ruthlessly prioritize, warn others, and then figure out how to work hard to recover. If you know you're not on that list, you got to be on it. And by the way, if you're on that list, you're not recovered. It just means that when we figure out what we're going to do, you're first. So that's where continuity economy planning comes in, continuity of operations planning comes in. That's where either the government and the private sector, in the sense of continuity of the economy, actually have to exercise ahead of time. And I love the energy guys. They go, well, we do grid X. Josh, we're covered. And you're like, well, you're covered for 1/10 of the problem you're going to face. The other 9/10, which is every other sector around you going down, you're not covered for. So what we actually need is to take the goodness of grid X and not white card all the other sectors, but instead the government should be running comprehensive ones by region that look at these issues. So you have to do COOP, continuity of the economy, your normal disaster response, which gets to public health and safety, and then you have to exercise all this together. If you do not exercise, your plan will fail. And last point, the current plans are all 15 years old. If you think your government is planning for you, and I would just say, if the problem's cyber and your answer is 15 years old, it's wrong. I don't even have to read it to know it's wrong. I'll also tell you that if you hold each one up to the sky, the word water, they were written by energy, I think, originally. But if you hold each one up, the word energy is removed, and water, education, farm and agriculture, it's replaced with that. That is not that is unfortunate. So right. I'm not in a good mood.
I promised Mark would be a firebrand. Did I deliver? Okay. Wow, there's so much to unpack there, and maybe you exhausted your round 2 as well. So just because, at least in healthcare, some of the people we talk to, COOP means continuity of operations for the patient care. So when you say COOP, capital COOP, whatever, you're talking about the ability for the military to defend the country.
For the ability of the COOP and COG, or the ability of the government to continue its operations, and the leadership, it's more than the military, but it's law enforcement, how that said, to continue to conduct operations in a controlled, prioritized manner.
Yeah. Okay. And we tried to get somebody from the tri-sector, which is financial services, energy, and communications. No.
Yes.
Yeah, and communications. Because we had an argument early in the Undisruptible 27 project where they said, screw the trauma centers, it's the data centers. Like, people are going to die, it's fine, but the economy needs to keep flowing. And they were very sincere in that. But I don't know if we've had a social contract conversation about, if we have these disruptions, what's the most important? And it may vary from region to region, but there's equities involved, disparities involved, et cetera. So Chuck and I are getting to know each other, and Chuck, instead of financial services, is here in part because there's this magic thinking that, who cares what the prioritization is if there's an abundance of response resources. However, I've done some crisis simulations. Chuck's done some work in the field. And we have a very large mismatch between expected capacity, excuse me, expected demand and current capacity. So Chuck's going to be here to say, if you think this is a toy example of trade-offs between COOP, coats, and public safety, have at it.
Hi, folks. So first of all, I don't claim to be an expert on anything. I'm just a dad who likes to read his daughter stories at night. And in order to do that, I need a light switch that when I flip it, I have, light, shiny light. And usually to make that electricity hit that light and, cause the heat to do all that thing, you have to have water at some point downstream of all this. And I mean, water's kind of nice to, like drink and not die. So slightly important. I started asking myself if we had enough people to handle, what could be a massive systemic problem. Back when we discovered, back when the US government discovered what could be perhaps the most scalable and capable malware that could apply across multiple different sectors. Piece of malware called Pipe Dream, discovered by the government. Private sector was brought in to help both understand and kind of get a read on how bad things were. And it turns out that the protocols and everything that the actor was focused on are used in almost every single one of the critical infrastructure sectors. So already that's not good, right? But let's just look at water really quick. So let's pretend that there's something like 53,000 community water utilities in the United States and about 16,000 wastewater providers in the United States. That's 69,000 plus or minus providers. And, if something goes sideways and it just impacts wastewater, okay? There's not 16,000 trained, capable OT cyber incident responders in the world, let alone in the United States of America, okay? And for those of you not familiar with Dragos, like incident response is one of the things that the company provides to our mission partners. And so when I think about the capacity that industry has, there's a lot of I gotchas in that too, because if we're truly being impacted at a national scale, my employees that are National Guardsmen, that are reservists, right, that work in this industry are probably going to get pulled because of their subject matter expertise to go do something governmental or military in nature. And if we're not careful when we think about, how we're utilizing people and where they're going and where we prioritize, we're gonna be in a situation where the people that our utility partners are relying on are no longer going to have the subject matter experts available to them because they're going to get pulled to another place to do another thing. And oh, by the way, if you think that other thing is here in the United States, you're probably wrong. Because if anybody can tell me the number of actual military cyber units that are aligned to defending and supporting critical infrastructure in the homeland, yep, the number of hands aligns with that number. Awesome. And oh, by the way, if you don't actually work in critical infrastructure, specifically if you don't work in a given sector, you don't have the knowledge, even at the safety level, right, to actually be an incident responder. So our government, inside the sector risk management agencies, they have built fantastic talent, right, that are sector specific. Inside the Department of War and the cyber capabilities along that line, they've built generalists that are fantastic generalists in some cases. But they have not built folks that have sector specific knowledge. So when we think about, are we even going to be effective if we have to tap the military to support? The answer to that one's no too. And you want to talk about, bad news bears. You mentioned, reservoirs and access to water if things go sideways. That assumes that pipes are still intact, right? That the adversary did not do something like water hammers over time, or that Mother Nature has not just collaborated with itself to make us have a bad day. And oh, by the way, how many like engineering companies do we have that can fix things, and how long does that take? And do we even have the supplies to like repair a pump? I mean, the lead time, I priced out some equipment, controllers and things last night. They're made here in the United States. All the components are here in the United States. It's a 91-day lead time right now. That's domestic sourced. Do we make every piece of, I mean, where did our pressure sensor come from, right? Where's that thing made? Absolutely. And
Is that why the slides were acting weird earlier?
That one came overnight. The one from the US took 90 days.
yeah, don't even, isn't that interesting how that happens? And I mean, you talk about, ability to warn other people and share amongst industry. Which country compromised our telecommunication providers in the United States? The PRC, yeah. And if you are sitting at the level inside telecommunications networks that you can pull data out of routers, switches, things of that nature, you're probably also at the point where you can, shut them off, turn off a port, right? Yeah. The who you gonna call question is a wicked problem, and the ability for the folks that already are in place to actually be able to do good work are predicated on us actually understanding, was it cyber or not cyber? And we have gotten better. The work that a lot of folks in this room have done, right, to encourage folks to get government money that can help provide cyber capabilities to commercial utilities has been great. But we're still in the probably, I don't even know if we've hit the 10% mark from a visibility perspective across infrastructure. So that's a problem too. Yeah.
Okay. So I let a lot of oxygen flow for some of these positions. We've got about 20 minutes that we could use. We could play by feel. I do have some follow-up questions I was going to do, but we wanted to provoke each of you. The one thing you didn't say, Chuck, so please turn your mic back on if it's off. You and I it is very, very difficult to get the incident response firms and the insurance firms to quantify their min-max and most likely number of IR teams, let alone OT subset of IR teams. If you had to venture a guess, how many qualified OT IR people are there in the domestic US?
I'm going to say somewhere around 300, 350. That's best case, in my opinion.
The insurance industry's guess was about 120. So how many surface water systems do we have in the US?
Yeah, that was 69,000 total.
So there will be a significant mismatch. So I just quick show of hands as you think of your questions, and I'll repeat them. If we stretch the point to make the point, who thinks if we're having a conflict, if China's having a conflict with Taiwan and they want to keep us out of the fight, who thinks our top priority should be forced mobilization, which is the movement of troops and munitions to the war theater, to not delay it a day or two? That's the COOP one. Raise your hand if you think, I'll say all three again. Number two is, who thinks we should make sure the economy, the banks, the data centers, the businesses continue to flow for our GDP? And who thinks we should protect civilians like you and your family? So those are your three options. Vote once. Who thinks the top priority is continuity of operations? Should be. Okay. Number two, who thinks it should be, is the economy stupid? Be honest. Okay. The conference last week would have had a very different answer than that. Yeah. Okay. And then who thinks it should be public safety, human life? Okay. It's not a moral thing. It's just like we don't have a consensus. It is moral.
But we have a consensus in the White House.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to make hard choices. And in some of the exercises, I did a talk at the RSA conference 2025 called War Games 2027, because my name is Joshua. So we played a game where the room had to choose between the left and the right, and each round got progressively harder. So there will come a time where if there's a burst water main to the data center and all the servers could overheat because you need water for cooling. or to the food manufacturing cold chain, or to the hospital, the trauma center, or the dialysis center, or the nursing home. You're going to have to make a choice. So in light of that, there's one pivot I'll do before we get to the other questions. This is not a one-to-one proxy, but can you try to, at a 50,000 foot level, explain when there's a mass casualty event for ER and disaster medicine, like the difference between me walking into an ER, what priority I would have, and when there's a mass casualty event, like what's the philosophy, first principles that dictate the difference in care?
I think the easiest analogy would be the process of triage. If anyone's ever seen like the firefighters doing the red tarp, the green tarp, the yellow tarp. The principle is in a mass casualty, your resources don't match your need, right? And so you have to make concessions in order to do the most good. And so the triage algorithms we use, which are, by the way, 60% effective no matter who does them, so completely imperfect, revolve around how can we benefit the most people. So on normal operations, you know, a trauma victim comes in, multiple gunshot wounds, perimortem, they're going to get all of our attention, right? We're going to do everything we possibly can. We're going to throw resources at them. We're going to crack their chests. We're going to do whatever we need to do to try to save that one person. In mass casualty, that person is on a black tarp. We're not going to be able to save that person. We know that. And so instead, we're going to focus on the 10 reds in order to try to do the most good. So I think that's the principle that you're.
So one of the things I've teed up with the cyber insurance industry and the insurance industry writ large is, do you have a principled, ethical, ruthless prioritization of who you're going to assist first, second, third? And do you have an accurate perspective on who you could bring to bear? And a lot of them will say, oh, we'll call Chuck's team at Dragos, except that Chuck's team at Dragos makes their own decisions about who they serve first, second, third. Is it first come, first serve, largest contract value, declared state of emergency, public safety, military bases? And the answer is, no matter what sector we run an exercise like this on, we haven't yet found that thoughtful, ethical, decisive plan to know if you're on the list, on the arc, or if you're not, and you're going to have to fight for yourself. Part of the idea of the cavalry isn't coming is empowering to know that I can at least fight to save myself. So you're about
Do you
to,
think there's a list?
we attempted a few times with Section 9 and other things, but there's been significant
I don't think
resistance.
there's a list.
There's no
I mean,
list.
this is the problem. I mean, the first thing you have to do is decide that you have to ruthlessly prioritize, and then you have to do it. And to do it, you have to do exercises. I mean, you have to have a discussion, you have to do research, and you have to exercise it. Go back, redo it. Whenever we write like a military plan, it may not look like it, but the plan we execute is probably the 5th or 6th variation of the plan, because you ruthlessly, practice it. I can stop saying ruthlessly, but because you persistently practice it. That's the problem we have here. The problem we have here is we will not even. I mean, the biggest frustration I think for you and me isn't that it hasn't happened. It's that the first steps necessary. Haven't happened. And if you don't, the first steps are hard because you don't get a lot of credit for it. I mean, the final process could take years, and in a policy, in a place where the government, the institutions of decision making view things in about 2-year limits, whether it's Congress or the executive branch, it's very hard to do a 5-year project. But that's what this is. And I'm just afraid that at the current rate, we're not going to do the first 2 steps so that you can get to steps 4 or 5 where you get real value.
So I think at the national level, you're correct. Since there's some policy people, including staffers, I'd be remiss not to look at Bob Kolosky from the formerly the National Risk Management Center. We have had concepts like Section 9, which is classified for the financial services, to say who's the most important entities for the continuity of the economy. It was unpopular. People didn't want to be on the list. They didn't know what being on the list meant. We had a more generic concept across the 16 sectors and the 55 national critical functions called SICI, Systemically Important Critical Infrastructure, or SIE, Systemically Important Entity. Boy, did the lobbyists and the sector risk management agencies and the sector specific agencies and the sector coordinating councils not want to do that. And it really took until, I think Sean Lingus covered this from CNN, I think he's in the room, but when Change Healthcare happened, I finally lost my cool and said, if we don't proactively identify our systemically important entities, our adversaries will continue to reveal them to us while we burn. And the truth is, whether you want it public or not, whether you want to advertise it or not, whether you want to make it dynamic or not, there's been a significant policy reluctance to actually know what's most important to us. Our adversaries know what's most important to us. And just as a pissed off protests, when I was asked to help run the security for Operation Warp Speed, I was given a list of 1,000 suppliers to the vaccine candidates. We turned it into 4,000. And within 7 days, we had our 66 ball bearings, the small unguarded weak links in the supply chain. With a handful of first principles, we were able to make a functional risk prioritization list. And it's something that every one of these national critical functions could do, but we've been reluctant to do. So I think this kind of a moment when we're besieged by Chinese military, Iranian hacktivists, mythos fueled things, this may be a time to find our courage and say, let's lean into our discomfort to actually know what is the most important to what else. Sorry to stump speech there. Before we go to you, last call for questions. We're gonna have about 15 minutes after his remark. So whoever has the questions, we'll get you a mic or I'll just repeat it. But I think at least on a micro scale, Undisrupted 27, as we engage with our 12 pilot communities, we are asking what's the most important stakeholders in your town? What's their downtime tolerance? What's the worst that can happen? And what can we do about it? So we can maybe innovate narrowly and expand. If it's not going to come from the federal government down, perhaps individual communities can decide what's most important to them.
So 2 things. One, on those exercises, anybody want to guess how many times as an industry provider in this space, as one of the more, I would say Dragos is one of the more significantly kind of known and recognized industry providers in this space. How many of those government tabletops have industry representatives who actually do the work been invited to?
Small number.
Approaching zero. I've never been involved in one, right? And I've been at Dragos since 2020. There's been a lot of them that have happened.
Yeah.
So that's a problem when your major commercial providers, the people that are going to be delivering the services to do the work, are not even part of the exercises where folks are trying to make decisions on our behalf. That's a problem.
All right, I think the first hand I saw was Munish. I'll just repeat the question.
Okay. I appreciate interested in like going the other way too. There is a water outage. There's like sanitation, pathogens, biofilm, and create kind of circular loops there. And the second is on water. I know we're focused on healthcare, but not talking about fire protection, emergency services, air quality, sanitation. There's our loopless prioritization. Okay. Quick comment on the IR. I looked at this analysis. It's been a couple of years, but the numbers I got to is moderate confidence between 200 to 500 IR firms and 1,000 to 3,000 incident responders with less than sub 1,000 focused on OT. That's what.
Worldwide.
Yeah.
Okay. It's a lot to repeat, but it sounds like wastewater could compound a synergistic relationship between wastewater and health, and I'll just let you go for there.
Yeah, I mean, I think as human beings, we know that we need water to survive, right? So at a minimum, you need some clean source of water for you and your family. And when you can't get that, you're going to try alternatives, probably less sanitary water. And then, the reason that people died from cholera before we discovered bacteria isn't really because cholera itself is that lethal. It's because they had such profound dehydration so quickly that they couldn't compensate, right? And so waterborne disease is extremely serious. It's very easy to happen. If you read the DC water report, you can learn about all the bacteria that's currently in the Potomac before the spill. Even before the spill, of course, now. And so where those people going to go, they're going to seek care in a hospital. They may need antibiotics. They probably need IV lines of intravenous fluid because they can't keep fluids down themselves. Then you have on top of that, like you said, sanitation, hygiene. How were we living hundreds of years ago before we didn't have, regular running water? Sanitation, hygiene is a huge part of how you prevent yourself from getting sick, not just from waterborne illness, right? It's how we cook our food. It's how we feed ourselves. And like I said, hospitals are the critical infrastructure. We're the safety net that takes on all of that. And then you had also mentioned, I think, EMS, first responders, and
Fire.
Sorry, what?
Fire.
And fire protection. Yeah, absolutely. So all of those things are really out the window we might be able to fire protect with bad water. But, your staff that is also part of EMS, part of the hospital are not going to come to work if they can't take care of their families.
1 second. So I learned from you, blew my mind at CyberMed 2 years ago, that fires are much more likely in a hospital because you have pure oxygen running through the walls, Bunsen
Yes.
burners. So like no fire suppression,
We
no
use
hydrants.
fire and our walls are full of gas.
And doctors who secretly smoke. No.
We're just, we do
Right.
have patients smoking in the bathroom a lot, so.
Go ahead, Chuck.
So two things to consider, and really I'll pitch this over to Dean, but one, what happens when you don't have power at a wastewater treatment plant? And two, is wastewater regulated by anything that says anything about cyber standards?
Turn on.
So most of you probably don't realize you're drinking somebody else's wastewater every day.
You're welcome.
So if any of your sources of water, potable water, are a river, that's where every wastewater treatment plant deposits to. So
Sounds like a
With
crappy
that-
plan.
so anyway, so the issue is, by today's standards, the water that we release from most wastewater treatment plants is drinkable. It's much cleaner than the water that the water treatment plant takes in. So you can imagine the quality of water in our rivers and things has significantly improved over that, except maybe the Potomac. But so if those systems start to fail, then obviously your water systems ultimately begin to fail because they're not built for taking in that kind of a contamination. They're built for what everyday consumption is on the river. I forgot what the other question.
Right.
Is wastewater regulated?
It's I mean, both industries are highly regulated,
But not for cyber.
They don't have any technology regulations. Well, I take that back. They have the levels of technology regulation for customer data. Which is
we just had
very
this morning,
important.
New York has instituted a state legislative solution for some minimum cyber hygiene standards for water, but that's the only one I know of.
Yeah, but
passed.
it won't go anywhere because they'll sue you over it. So
All right, I'm trying to get to two more questions.
I'll go after the 2 questions.
Okay. Let's try to do speed round for all. I'll have you both ask, and then I'll try to synthesize them. By the way, I have to fight some very serious FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There's lots of things that suffer without water, right? No water is no shower, no water is no laundry, no water is no coffee. But people have no water is no fire hydrants to put out fires. But people have suggested that no water means no toilet flushing, and that's a lie. You can flush once. Okay. Okay. So
Shouldn't, because
second,
it's drinkable
your
water.
question, please.
So, waste of water is what-
sorry.
No, I was gonna say, what is the one step? Water system. Or treatment plant that they should we can use? Given the decentralized, but given the demonstration you have. What's the one best next step?
As odd as it sounds, is because the industry itself communicates very, very well internally, but they suffer greatly from if it's not invented here. I mean, there's a American Water Works Association, AWA, takes care of the water plants, and there's a Water Environment Federation that takes care of the wastewater plants. They hate each other.
And they hate the EPA more.
And so for me, the first step is everybody just stop viewing the government as an enemy. And especially in this instance, specifically this instance.
Going to pivot to Matt in a second. Part of the answer for undisruptible that I've learned from Dean and Gus and other water engineers is as we identify these risks from cyber, the solutions often come from engineering. So this is a tiny one. This is a pressure reduction, pressure release valve that's essentially a shock absorber for some of these, depending on the size of the pipe in the water column. We have a talk at 3:30 outlining 5. All of these combined for one of the towns we're looking at is under $10,000 total, and they're water engineer familiar solutions. So that we're not powerless in the face of this. We just haven't been warned, motivated, or directed at what's coming and how to do something about it. So usually when you have terrible, scary news, it's like, oh, this guy is falling, let's crawl in a hole and die. The positive news here is Idaho National Lab Cyber Informed Engineering kind of lit the way on how to use their love language to fix some of these things. And Matt's talk after us, I believe, Lauren and Matt combo, CISA's got the CI fortified. It's also not Pollyannishly saying, let's do zero trust architectures. It's saying, what can you do right now? Like a day without internet drill, like segmentation, like look at your highest consequence failure modes. So I think there's some pragmatism necessitated by the moment. It's not powerless, but it's not free. And it's not, we don't have a ton of time to have the conversations. But Matt, you were next.
Chuck, don't kill me. How much does incident response really matter here? Because, I mean, think about it from, in this scenario, wartime, right? Like the thing that's going to happen is, components will get compromised. They'll start doing negative things. The engineer will notice well before any cyber person gets brought in. The engineer will turn it off back on again, maybe reflash it, and immediately just take another piece of equipment that's the exact same thing that just got hacked, put it on the shelf, and now it'll get hacked. And now we don't have any hardware. So what does the IR person do? Because that's now a long tail. Is this really the correct tree to bark up? I know this isn't actually 0-7, but
No, that's a great point, because guess what? At the end of the day,
for the camera.
oh yeah, sorry. The question was, does incident response really matter? When the process we're going to see is engineer sees something goes wrong, engineer turns on, turns off, engineer replaces equipment that now immediately gets compromised, and now we're out of spares from the shelf. No, so incident response matters. However, being able to tell it was cyber or not cyber matters more. And being able to keep systems going, like be resilient, matters most, I would say. And I would also encourage folks from the one thing you could do, just don't put your stuff on the internet, please, and change your passwords.
That's the same thing I tell my teenage kids. Hey, so 2 things. First, I want to, Tom Billington, I'll answer your question slightly differently and say, the one thing you have to do is patch faster than the water system next to you. You know what I mean? But really address your systems that are in the National Vulnerability Database that have a problem. At a minimum, if you could do that, you'll still get attacked. But I think that you want to make yourself less vulnerable than the target next to you. I do want to say, what I was going to say earlier is broadly thinking about this is that we could do this there's like 17 or 18 sectors, not 16, because the transportation is broken up and 1 or 2 are fake. But let's say of the 18 sectors, I'd say 16 of the 18 could have this discussion.
Yeah.
So water's not unique, but I would say is water uniquely sucks, right? Which is to say the amount of investment by the industry is exceptionally low, particularly the 90% that are public sector owned.
That would be by
Because-
the public, not the industry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I
Public utility.
get that the public's the one that doesn't want to pay higher rates and doesn't, like my wife votes against the bond. I get that. But it's combined with an EPA that is not good at its job and hasn't been on a bipartisan basis across 5 or 6 administrations. And despite the fact that they were named as a sector-specific agency 27 years ago, that they were the second one named, they have successfully sucked for 27 years. And then third, when you have 1 and 2, it's almost impossible for the collaboration between the 2 to be good. So it takes organizations like yours, like grinding down, and it makes you go to the micro level instead of the macro level to get a solution. I'm not saying it won't work. I mean, I'm just saying this is literally, if you had to draw a path and say, what's the hardest possible way I could do this? It's suck at all 3 of those things and then try to fix it from the micro level. But that's what we're going to do, because the only way we're going to succeed is if you succeed and we drive this from the micro level with a series of pilots that convince other communities to do it and drive it up. It will not succeed in the current, and there's no way I know we're almost out of time, but there's no way I see us becoming successful in water in a top-down solution at this point.
All right, we told you we'd stir the pot. Hopefully we have. there's lots more we can build upon from here. You're going to hear from Secure by Design, Fortnite Without Water, from in the same room immediately following is Matt from CISO and CI Fortify. I'm going to talk at 3:30 about some of these engineering solutions. But the last piece of advice for your question is the UK government told its citizens without telling them why, please have a solution for up to 3 weeks of self-reliance on clean drinking water. The degree to which we might reduce the burden on Natalie's hospitals and others, there's some personal resilience, there's some community resilience, and there's some regional resilience. So there are common sense, easy things we can do for life straws, water filtration, et cetera, that may buy our towns a few days, maybe even a few weeks to get their feet underneath them. The life you save may be your own. Thank you for your time today. Let's yield the floor to our next talk.